Good evening. Are y'all there now? I can see everybody and we're doing good. Okay. All right. Let's see. I have Linda and Kelly. Victoria. Can you hear me, Victoria? Okay. And
Yes, I
Tracy
can hear you.
Hughes and let's see. Tamara's there. Brittany's there. Annette. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. And let's see. Megan, Peyton. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Veronica, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, and then we got Irene there, and we got Crystal. Can you hear me, Crystal?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Let's see. Miss Perkins, I can see you right there. Can you hear me? All right, we're good. And then we have Anna. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, y'all, we're at week number 7. How many of you watched the governor's press conference this afternoon?
I did.
Yes.
How many of y'all were hoping that something else would happen other than what happened? I'm telling you, y'all, this is something I've never seen anything like this. Even when we had the hurricane last fall, I'd never seen anything like this. And like I said, this is kind of interesting because it's going to make education an entirely different entity. But I got to thinking about this though too. How many of you have thought about what's going to happen the next time we have a hurricane, or we have a reason to be out of school, maybe a weather-related incident? Think about what we're learning to do right now in schools that will serve us better next time when we have something happen. Anybody thought about that lately? That's something that's kind of interesting because of the fact that we've never thought about that, but now for the first time, if something happens again, we're going to be able to just pick right up after a day or two and go on. As long as you've got a signal, we'll know how to handle things like that. So there's some good sides and there's some bad sides. I'll just say that. So that being said, we're seeing some things. I don't know about you, but I've had all the togetherness I can stand in one little house. So anybody running into that issue?
Yes.
My poor dog has taken many a walk every day. So, like I said, sometimes things are good and sometimes they are bad. But then again, sometimes they're just there too. I'm hoping though, from what they're saying, I'm really kind of hoping that we will have we'll have some things back open sometime by mid-May. I'm really hoping that because, I know if you're like me, you miss running into people and seeing people. You miss the fact that the only place you can go is the grocery store and gas station, and that's about it. So, so if you're like me, you're kind of thinking about that a little bit. Wanted to talk a little bit tonight about your leadership philosophy a little bit. On Sunday night, we have our leadership philosophy paper that is going to be due. Okay. And one of the things I think is really important for us to think about when you're doing this, if you look at the outline for tonight's class, it says week 7 seminar. There's some things in there that I really want you to think about, because one of the things we've talked about over and over again this semester is we have talked about leadership and what leadership is. But have you ever really thought about what your own philosophy of leadership was? And that's one of the things, now that we've gone through almost 8 weeks of this course, that I really want you to take some time and dig into and think about a little bit. Because, as we've said all along, leadership is kind of a wide, broad topic, and it can encompass a lot of things. But let me ask you all a question here. After 7 weeks and after going through the things and after getting assignments and doing things that we've been doing and getting articles and so forth and so on, what's one of the things that you really think about with leadership that's really kind of a standout for you? When you think about the term leadership, what are some of the standout things that just come to mind, and they don't ever vary from what you think about?
behaviors of a leader comes to my mind.
Okay, well,
Um,
Tamara, tell me a little bit about what you're thinking there.
um, well, we talked about the different types or different styles of different leaders. Like
Uh-huh.
I think you said laissez-faire and like the one that's more dominant. You think about those types of qualities that a leader may have that you might have within yourself. Like when we talked about those that possibly are so dominant that they don't even pay attention to that. Like you have to do what I say and have to do it this way now. Um, there are some times where, looking back, I have been that way, but then I've also been that one that's like, okay, kind of lenient and like allow the students to kind of feel where they want to go or how they want to do a certain way, how the class should lead.
Mhm.
But that's what I think about when I think of leadership, is the qualities that what makes them stand out to be a leader.
Okay, maybe things that make them stand out to be a leader, and that may be a thing that may be a thing that you really look at is what makes someone stand out as a leader. You know, when you're talking about your own leadership philosophy, or you may have a personal leadership philosophy that you have thought about and maybe have developed over this course. You know, one of the things about leadership, and I'll just say this, we did not do anything much with leadership studies prior to about 1990. Okay. Um, we really didn't do much about leadership studies. You know, honestly, in the military, we did certain things, but we didn't do a lot of things for a lot of parts of the military for a long time. You know, and then all of a sudden, you know, you started having, you know, officers who would get sent to the war college, or you would get senior NCOs who would get sent to training that, you know, 40 or 50 years ago we didn't even have, okay, in the military. Now, when you're also talking about that in education, we never talked about leadership. I can tell you when I first began teaching, nobody ever talked about leadership. You know why? Because leadership just wasn't a part of anything. You know, it wasn't a part of any of the studies. It wasn't a part of any of your coursework. Um, you know, and it's funny. Do you know what the top two groups of people were who got to be principals in North Carolina pretty much most of the time? You know what they did, what their jobs were before they became principals? Most of them were either band directors or football coaches, because the mindset was, well, you know how to deal with a lot of people, so therefore you ought to be a pretty good leader. So we're going to make you a principal, or we're going to make you an assistant principal. You know, we've learned there's a lot more to leadership than that. You know, one of the things I will say is this, and I'll just point out when we talk about leadership where it is, I think one of the things that as a principal I always looked for in teachers was someone who's willing to kind of take initiative versus someone who has to wait for someone to tell them what to do. I mean, you know, because one of the things about good leadership in your classroom is that you're going to take some risks as a classroom teacher. You're going to take some risks. And when you take those risks, you also are going to understand that when you take risks, that yes, you could have it not work. I mean, how many of you have ever planned a lesson and you went to deliver it, and try as you might, try the very best you couldn't make that lesson come off the whole class period. You tried and tried and tried and tried and tried, and the kids got confused, and you got confused, and you got frustrated, the kids were getting frustrated. Anybody ever have that happen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, what's that like? You know, a good leader in that situation, a good classroom leader, a good teacher leader is going to do what in that situation?
Go back and revamp that lesson.
They're probably going to go back and revamp that lesson. But let me ask you a question: are you going to keep pushing it on the kids that day, or are you going to say, "Kids, this is a flop. Let's go do something else, and we'll come back to this another time"? How many of y'all
Do
find
something
yourself doing
else.
that?
No, we just stop.
You know, and that's one of the things that's kind of funny. I used to tell teachers when I'd go in to observe teachers, I would say to them, look, if I go in there and everything is falling apart and it's just, I mean, the wheels have come off the wagon and it's going nowhere, you don't need a bad evaluation. I'll just get up and I'll leave the classroom. And it's funny because of the fact that, a lot of times people will just stay there and say, well, we need to see if we can get this teacher to get out of this situation. Well, I can tell you right now, when someone's looking over my shoulder and things aren't going well, am I giving it my best effort? No. And that's usually what happens. That's one of those things about leadership, particularly with kids and in your classrooms, is that you have to do that. So looking at the key parts of leadership, that's going to be a very important part of your philosophy essay. Um, Also, this is kind of important too, and I really want you to think about this. Have you ever thought about what your students expect of you every day? What do your students expect of you?
I think you're supposed to have it together and know everything and not not make any mistakes.
Okay, they expect you to have it together, not make any
Mhm,
mistakes. But
mhm.
but let me ask you a question, Irene. Realistically,
Yeah,
how realistic is that?
not at all.
It's not.
No, it's not.
Well, let me
Uh-uh.
ask you. Let me ask you this: when you're in front of your students and you have that situation where you really honestly don't know, how do you deal with that as a leader? Tell me how you deal with that as a leader.
I mean, I told my students, I was like, y'all look, Miss Irene just don't know. So let me come back and work on this. But we're gonna do like a review on another lesson that we've done. Because I was very strong on zones and regulations. So um, I'll do, a type of activity just to kind of break the ice. Um, and then we would go to to do something else. But I wouldn't sit there and try to figure it out in front of them because that's when your classroom management and everything, it just everything will get out of hand, behaviors. Um, the class clown just thinks that it's his time to shine. So I would I would definitely try just do a review, quick implementing something else.
Okay. Well, have you ever said as a leader, hey, look, I really don't know. Can we all sit down together and try to figure out a way to do it?
Mm,
Sometimes, sometimes good leaders will come right out and say, look, we really don't know, but let's sit down together and see if we can't figure out how to do it. I mean, my little girl and I, I've had to do school in the middle of the day every day since mid-March, like everybody else, because of this thing. And one of the things that's kind of interesting is that, you know, even though I go into school buildings and I do stuff in school buildings, there are a lot of things that have changed an awful lot since I was that age and since I was in buildings every single day. And one of the things I have to do a lot of times is with the new math stuff they're doing. I have to go back and I have to refresh myself on what the vocabulary is. When they're talking about parts of the whole and things like this, and and you have to stop and think about it because it's stuff you just do. But for her, I got to be able to explain it. And there are times when I just have to say to her, Avery, Dad doesn't know what this is. Can I look it up? And fortunately, she's kind of a captive audience. She doesn't have anywhere to go right now, which is kind of good because she might pitch a fit otherwise if she had somewhere she could go. But the thing is that she expects me to be able to help her. And sometimes one of the best things you can do as a leader is honestly say, I don't have a real clear answer on that, but we can work on one and get an answer together. And people are usually okay with that. Now, if you come up and you just don't know anything at all most of the time, eventually you're going to have a problem. So, one of the things I tell you is think about, what your students expect of you, because students do expect things. They expect you to have it together, but students also expect some other things too. Good leaders are empathetic leaders. I do believe that they're empathetic. Now, they may not be sympathetic. They may not just say, all right, oh, I'm so sorry that this has happened. And you just have to, I just feel bad for you and all that. They may say, well, look, I'm sorry it happened. However, we've got to get this done, and so, but good leaders are empathetic. They understand that there is an objective. Now, let me ask you a question from a leadership standpoint when you're thinking about your philosophy of leadership that you're going to write your essay on. What do you think your colleagues expect of you, the people you work with? What do they expect of you in a school setting?
I
Too
would say
much.
professionalism, respect, common courtesy, um, joint efforts, being able to work well with others.
Okay. They expect a lot of the things we talk about with our kids. We think about those with adults too. Adults want you to treat them as professionals. Adults want you to be courteous to them. They want you to be respectful of them and the things they're doing. That's not anything out of the ordinary. I think one of the things that I've been reading this book while we've been out, with the virus thing. And it's a biography on Fred Rogers. Everybody knows who Fred Rogers is, right? Mr. Rogers, It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Mr. Rogers. Well, and one of the things that was kind of funny about it, a lot of people didn't realize Fred Rogers was, he was very, he was very exacting about the things he wanted. When they started putting that TV show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, on, one of the things that was kind of funny about it was that he wanted things to be developmentally appropriate for children. And there were some excerpts in there that I like to go back to, because I always think about these as a leadership expert, that he really was an expert on how you would lead other people, because they would be filming an episode and something would come up and they really couldn't answer how it fit developmentally into things. And so he'd just take off the set, because, they filmed Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there are three major universities in Pittsburgh. University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, and Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which is kind of funny. Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I have to laugh about that. But the thing that's so funny about it was he would just take off to go see the child development experts at one of these university campuses to ask them about questions he had, because you got to remember, this was back pre-internet, everything. So he just drop everything, take off, and everybody be sitting there on the set waiting for him to come back. But the thing that was so funny about it was that he was so intent on what they did being important to these children and being correct for these children, so that he wanted to make sure that they were doing the right things developmentally. And so that's one of those things that colleagues expect you to be, to be on there. But colleagues, they don't expect you to be perfect, but I do think colleagues expect you to be competent. And that's one of the things you might want to think about. And now this is something we've talked about a whole lot. Let's think about this as teachers a little bit. Your community. Now, who is your community? Tell me a little bit about your community. Who is your community? Okay.
I would say the parents.
Okay, your parents might be your community. Who else is part of that community?
Local churches.
Well, your local churches, your local organizations out in your towns. Who else would be part of your community? The real obvious part of your community would be who?
The students and coworkers.
Your students and your colleagues in the school building, and in general, the student population, the administration, your community. One of the things I'll say is this: everybody in here is more than likely going to work in a community that's not going to be any bigger than about 12 to 15,000 people. Most of you all are going to work in small towns, and there's not a bad thing. But educators in small towns, you know what the good thing about being an educator in a small town is?
I know your mama. You
Right.
must
Everybody.
Everybody knows you, and everybody knows what you can do. Do you know what the bad thing about being an educator in a small town is? Do you know what the bad thing about being an educator in a small town is?
Everybody knows you.
Same thing.
It's a double-edged sword. It's great in one respect, but it can also be rough in another. But one of the things I want to point out, and I've said this every week through this entire course, is that as educators in smaller towns, and you guys are all working in smaller towns, none of y'all working in huge cities, which is not a bad thing, because I believe me, I'd much rather work in a small town than work in a huge city. But one of the things that I will say, and I'll go back to it all the time, is this: educators in smaller towns, particularly in the South and particularly in Eastern North Carolina, have a lot of influence on things outside of their classrooms and outside of their school buildings. And as a leader, you have the opportunity to influence how a lot of things get done in a lot of towns, and a lot of churches, and a lot of civic groups, and a lot of little league teams, you name it. You have a lot of influence that you don't think about. Now, granted, you may not have any influence in Raleigh when they get ready to determine whether they're going to give teachers a raise or not. But the point is, you have a lot of influence in your small communities because you are looked up to because of the positions you hold in schools. Because people, whether we pay teachers what they deserve or not is one thing, but the point is that people respect teachers' positions and the fact that they are part of communities. And I'm going to tell you something. I mean, you go into any church in Eastern North Carolina today, and I can guarantee you over half of the leadership positions in that church, your Sunday school teachers, your deacons, your ushers, whatever, are all going to be connected in some way, shape, or form to education, because of the fact that, that's the reputation that educators have, is that they're there to serve. And they're good at it, And so that's why I want you to think about what your community expects of you. Now, this philosophy essay, and I want you to think about it. Your philosophy essay, when you start doing it, I want you to really dig in there and show me what you think about your philosophy of education and what your philosophy of leadership is in relation to what you do. I think that's a very important thing because, like I said, we never talked about leadership before, but now we're talking about leadership on a regular basis because leadership is key. Organizations that are successful, schools that are successful, school districts that are successful have leaders in them from the boiler room to the boardroom. Okay. And, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. I was principal of an elementary school in Havelock from 2008 to 2013. And in that school, free and reduced lunch was about 75%. Had a fair number of single parent students. It wasn't a terrible school to be in. It was a nice little school to be in. But it was not a country club school. It was a school where, kids' parents didn't get to come out to a whole lot because they had to work. And, we had to do a lot of things about that. But we had a custodian, and he was a retired Marine Corps Master Sergeant. And to give you an idea, nice guy. And he really, the only reason why he did the job was he wanted something to do. He was older, and his wife had died, and he wanted something to do. He didn't have to work. He had a great military retirement, and he was past 60 years old. He didn't have to work, but he chose to work. And one of the things that was really good about this guy was this guy, a lot of times, like particularly little, what I call hard-headed little male kids who, maybe there's not another male figure at home for them to identify with. He had this way of talking to those kids, and he was very good at it. And I mean, he was better at it in a lot of ways than our guidance counselor was. And that was one of the things that was kind of interesting about it. But, and I asked him one time, I said, well, why do you do this? He said, let me tell you something. He said, I grew up in Baltimore. I grew up poor. He said, I never knew who my dad was. My mom was gone all the time. A brother raised me. He said, when I graduated from high school, the only option I had was the United States Marine Corps or going to jail because he had gotten in trouble. And back at that point in time, they used to give you the option. A lot of times you could go in the military if you were, if you were a juvenile delinquent, they'd give you the option to go in the military to avoid going to jail. And so he said, I went. He said that was the best thing I could do was to go. And he said it was the best thing that happened to me because he said, he said, I had a nice family. I met my wife and just everything, now the guy had pulled 3 tours in Vietnam. He was, he was a good guy, but he had pulled 3 tours in Vietnam and he was, he had seen some things and, he was, he was just he was a nice guy, but he really wanted to do right by those kids. It wasn't the fact that he wanted to go there and, and mop floors and clean bathrooms, but he wanted something to do and he wanted something that was meaningful. And I'll tell you, that was one of the things that was really important from a leadership standpoint because he was on our school improvement team also. And, one of the things he always did was he always took small groups of kids. Like, for example, when we did drop everything and read, anybody do DEAR at your school? Drop everything and read's a really cool little program. And basically what it is for 20 minutes during the day. Sometime in the day, we did ours in the morning after announcements. Basically everybody in the school drops everything, they pick up a book and they read. And he would do DEAR with 2 or 3 kids, particularly if there were kids who had a hard time reading. He would sit down and do DEAR with them. He'd go down to the kindergarten, first grade wing, and they'd sit at a little round table out in the center courtyard area, and they would read. And he would read with them, and they'd read to him, and it was good. It really was. But he was a leader. And he was a leader who wasn't trying to be a leader. He was a leader because of the fact that he had some interest in things. So that's why I really want you to think about what it is that you do as a leader and what it is that you do that helps you develop your philosophy. Now, let me ask you a question while we're talking about this because we're not going to be on long tonight. But let me just ask you this. When we're talking about leadership and we're talking about things, is your philosophy of leadership going to be static? Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I talk about static leadership?
It's not going to change over time, and you want it to change over time.
You do want, thanks, Peyton. You do want it to develop. You want your leadership philosophy to change over time. As you grow and develop, you want your philosophy to grow and develop with you. One of the things that I will tell you is that you'll see 2 different types of teachers in school buildings. You'll see the teacher who comes in at year 1 and works really, really hard and every year brings something new to the table and improves skills. And if something's not working, they get rid of it and they make their skills work for them over the time of their career. They get better every year. They're always changing. They're always adjusting. They're always growing. And then you have the other kind of teacher, and you've all seen these teachers. They graduated from college. They got their license. They taught their first year, and then they repeated the first year every year for the next 29 years, drove everybody in the school building crazy. The kids hated them. The parents hated them. The administration hated them. Their colleagues hated them. And all everybody was doing was praying for them to retire. Anybody know anybody like that? And the reason why I say that is that when you talk about what you do as a teacher, when you walk in that classroom, that's where you have to lead. And that's why I want to see what your philosophy is all about. Okay. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. But I'm also going to talk about this too. So we're going to kind of hit the last 2 assignments together. Now, the last assignment that you have due on week 8, which is May 3rd, was called a leadership shadowing project. Now, I looked at it and no, you can't shadow somebody because we're not in school buildings right now. But what I would like for you to do is I'd like for you to maybe take the same information that you would be doing if you were shadowing, pick somebody out who you think of as a good leader, whether it's somebody that you observed in the school building or whether it's somebody you work with now, or maybe somebody that you can think about even when you were in school. And I want you to do your profile on those folks using the shadow and information. You just won't be able to follow them. Okay. Does that make sense? Basically, I want to see that you all are able to identify people who have the effectiveness to lead and to make an impact on you, because your job is going to be this. Your job is to make an impact on the people who are sitting in front of you, you know, because those little people, let me just explain something. They didn't ask for who they got for a teacher, okay? They didn't ask for them. And I can tell you right now, mom and dad did not keep the best kids at home. They sent you what they got. They sent you the best they have. Now, how many of you shaking your head before when you saw that and thought, this is the best that's at home? Oh my gosh. Yeah. Because sometimes it does stress you out a little bit. But I want you to think about that, because we're now down in the last 2 weeks of this course, and we're now down into the point where I want to see that you can put feet under what we've been talking about, okay? And you know, that's one of the things that's really important, because in order for you to grow as a teacher leader, can you take the information and can you internalize it and can you use it? That's the important part, okay? And that's the part I want you to think about. Let me ask you all one question. I'm gonna shift gears for just a minute, because we've got a couple of minutes left before we're done. How many of you are going to have to take 484 at some point in time? They've told you have to take EDU 484. Anybody? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Residency people, y'all gonna take it. Y'all gonna take it in the summer.
Which one is that?
That's introduction to teaching.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
It's a 1 hour class.
Okay, the one credit. Yeah, I think I have it with
Okay.
you this summer.
Okay, I've got to say
It's gonna be fall. It's fall for me.
Okay, well, let me just explain something with you all. One of the things that's really important with this is that, you know, thinking about this leadership piece and how this leadership piece goes into what you're doing, you really want to think about this in relation to task number 3 that you're going to have to do, where you're going to have to create a lesson, because a good teacher leader is going to know kind of the makeup of the class and how to effectively deliver instruction. So, like I said, I want you all to think about that. And I will tell you this real quick. One of the things that's going to happen, those of you anybody in here going to take the PPAT in the fall, you know you're going to do it in the fall? Linda, you're probably going to do it in the fall, I'm assuming, aren't you? Won't you be done with your coursework by then?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Well, I'm taking that.
Those of you who are going to do the PPAT, let me just explain something to you. I'm going to go ahead and do a shameless plug here in the last 2 weeks. In the fall, I'm going to be setting up some Saturday workshops for you guys, so that anybody who's taking the PPAT, and you know, basically it's a show up. It's one of those show up things, and you know, we kind of work through everything so people know how to deliver things. These courses are going to help you an awful lot when you start thinking about that in the fall. You know, like for example, what you're doing with leadership. Task number 3 connects to leadership, and task number 1 connects to leadership. So that's why I'm really wanting you to think hard about this project you're doing that's due Sunday night, because I really want you to work all those pieces together. Now, is there anything anybody needs to ask? Anything anybody needs to ask that, okay? Tanisha, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I would want to say, I'll be finished with my classes in August, I think, at the end of August or September. So would that mean I take the PP?
Yes,
okay.
You'll take the PPAT in the fall. Yes.
Right. Okay. I was trying to get in to tell when you asked, but I couldn't get in. I had to turn my microphone on.
Not a problem. Don't worry. Is there
Okay.
anybody else who has any questions that they need to ask?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, Tiffany.
I have there's 2 classes now. Then I have 2 classes, I think 480 and 485 in the summer. And so what happens after that?
After you finished with your courses that are in your plan of study, then you'll sign up to do the PPAT probably in the fall. I'm thinking you'll do it in the fall.
Because I ran into the situation where they said something about, now is that what you're talking about? Is that considered student teaching?
Now, are you a full-time student, or are you doing residency?
Supposedly residency.
Well, let me just explain. With with what you guys will be doing. You all won't student teach. The thing is, that's the 4-task assignment that you have to turn in to be evaluated on to get your license.
Okay, I think I'm in a residency.
So you'll register for that in the fall, and that information will come out to you in the summer. So the university will send that to you.
Okay.
I just wanted to touch base so we can connect everything to it. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask? Okay, Annette. Okay. Annette, I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you maybe check, make sure you don't have anything on? Okay, Annette, can you hear me? Okay, you're getting some feedback. That's why I was trying to find out.
It might be my connection.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, well you're sounding kind of we're getting a lot of reverberation here. I'll tell you what, why don't you email your question to me, and I will get back to you this evening, okay?
Okay.
All right. Does anybody else have anything they need to ask? Okay. Tanisha? Oh, okay.
No, I don't.
All right. Does anybody else have anything? Okay, I do want to mention this between now and May 3rd. Please make sure you do the course evaluation. There's a student evaluation for the course. Please go ahead and do that because, like I said, I use that information when we revamp courses to, to help make them more, relevant to what y'all need. So, like I said, please be sure you go on and do that. It won't take 5 minutes to do it. And, like I said, it's a good opportunity for me to get information as to what I can do to make things better for you all. Now, remember, you have the philosophy essay due tonight, on Sunday night, and then on May 3rd, you have the leadership project, the little leadership shadowing thing. So it won't take long to do either one, but just be very thorough with those. Okay. Kelly, are you all right? You look like you're about to fall asleep. You okay?
I'm okay. I'm just exhausted.
Okay, well, I understand all about that. So I just was checking on you. You just didn't look like you were alert like you normally are. So I just wanted to check. You all right?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm listening.
Okay. All right. Well, look, you all have a good evening. Have a good weekend. You know how to get up with me if you need me. Okay.
Okay.
Y'all have a good night and take care. And I will see you next week for our final class meeting.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank
Stay.
you.
See you,
Bye.
Miss Linda.
Hey.